Welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here, and I hope you can all understand my accent, but if anyone needs me to slow down, please just shout at me at any point. So my name's Lisa, I'm from the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, and some of you might have come expecting the Scenario 2030 event, the 45-minute session. We've actually, the Wellbeing Economy Alliance and Scenario 2030, looked at the programme, saw we were next to each other and that we have really shared ideas for what we wanted to get out of this session. So we've joined forces for a longer session that, first of all, we're going to hear from these two wonderful women here, I'll introduce in a moment, about alternative economic thinking, not-for-profit models, and then we're all going to get involved in that discussion about applying those ideas to your work and the change making that you're doing. So the Wellbeing Economy Alliance is a global organisation that is a movement for social justice on a healthy planet through the transformation of economic systems. And we welcome members, organisations and individuals who are working towards that goal, whatever they are doing. And we also have hubs all over the world as well, which I'll say a bit more about at the end. And Scenario 2030 are a Swedish project which is working with mostly young people, but adults as well, on visions for a shared future where we can all thrive, starting with those positive visions instead of starting with the problems. So we're really excited to be working together today to bring you this workshop and this conversation. And I'm really excited to have my colleague here, Amanda Janoo, who is the Wellbeing Economy Alliance Economics and Policy Lead. So Amanda works with our members and with policymakers around the world to bring economic system change to life in policy making, and we'll be hearing more from her in a second. And we also have Jennifer Hinton, who is professor at Lund University and has been a long time friend and ally of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, and she's an expert in alternative business models and not-for-profit economic thinking. So what we're going to do with our time together today is Amanda and Jennifer will first of all share a little bit of their own personal story and their journey into this work, and then we'll have a conversation amongst the three of us. Then we'll open that out to questions and comments from you all. And then in the second half, we're going to split into smaller discussion groups and talk about how these new economic system ideas could apply to your work as changemakers and activists, and what help we as the Wellbeing Economy Alliance and Scenario 2030 could give to help you make an impact through an economic system change lens. So Amanda, we'll start with you. Just for 5 minutes, if you could tell us a bit more about your journey into this work. And welcome, come in, just take a seat. If you could tell us more about your journey to this work and why you care about building a new economic system.
Sure. Thanks so much, Lisa. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here at this People's Forum and also at the Stockholm Plus 50. And as Lisa said, I'm the Economics and Policy Lead for WEAll, and I think my journey to the Wellbeing Economy movement and into new economic thinking started pretty young. So I'm from a very small rural town in Vermont in the United States, and our town has one paved road and a general store, and so it's too small to have a proper government. And so rather what we have is every March a town meeting where the town comes together and they meet together and they deliberate for a couple days on how much money is going to go to the roads or how much to the school or who's going to be in charge of catching dogs for the year. And so that was really my introduction to politics and my introduction to economics. And so you can imagine my horror when I actually started studying economics. And there's a big assumption in there that the economy is governed by its own natural laws as opposed to governed by us. And so my interest in economics really emerged out of this view of the world as this complex Venn diagram, and you have all of these social and political, environmental, cultural, and even spiritual issues and dimensions, and I felt like somewhere towards the center sat the economy, and if we could transform that system, then it would ripple out and really improve all areas of life. And so with starry eyes, I remember taking my first economics class in college and being immediately very confused and annoyed because I wanted to understand how the economy worked, right? And ideally on how to change it. But all I found was a lot of jargon and old white dudes talking about supply and demand or GDP growth rates and stock market values as if they mattered more than life itself. And so that's really where my now decades-long love-hate relationship with economics began, because I believe that one of the biggest tricks that's really been played on humanity is to present the economy as something really boring and abstract that happens out there beyond our control. And by presenting the economy as this sort of magical self-regulating system, ultimately what they're doing is denying us avenues and agencies to actually impact and influence such a core area of our life. And so for me, it's really about recognizing that we are the economy, yeah, and that we have the capacity to transform this system. And so to me, I often describe the economy as just a word for the way that we produce and provide for one another. It's an activity, a means by which we go about improving our quality of life. And once we recognize that the way we produce and provide for one another is always going to be influenced by our policies, our history, our geography, our culture, and so many other factors, then you realize there can't be a one-size-fits-all economic model, right? Or even a universal template of what this system should look like, because it's always got to be a reflection of us and our goals and our objectives. And so it was for this reason that I really started working in economic policy, and specifically industrial policy, because I really wanted to challenge this neoliberal approach of encouraging governments to take a very hands-off approach to the economy. Because industrial policy is pretty much just like old school development policy, where governments are meant to really strategically protect and promote certain kinds of economic activities that they think are important for their like broader development goals, and to proactively change the structure of their economy. And so I worked for a very long time for the UN and other development agencies as an economic policy expert. And I think one of the major contributions I ever gave to these processes was just to continuously ask the question, why? Yeah? Why do you want GDP growth? Why do you want more investment? Why do you want to transform your economy? What are you really trying to achieve with this economic policy? And that question was so rarely asked, but it was so important because it gave you an understanding of what the real development goal was. And it would vary across spaces. And so in Ukraine, it was peace. In Myanmar, it was rural-urban inequality reduction. In Mozambique, it was resilience. And having clarity on what you're really trying to achieve through that economic policy was important, because if Myanmar wants to reduce inequality, then just attracting large multinational corporations who are the most effective consolidators of wealth is not the way you want to do it, right? You would rather support cooperatives and locally embedded firms that are going to create multipliers and support with a more equitable, balanced development. And so this was really what ultimately led me to the Wellbeing Economy movement, because this was a global community of people who all recognize that we need to have more clarity on what we're trying to achieve here. Yeah? And we need to stop treating people and planet like they're here to serve the economy, and start treating the economy like it's here to serve us. And so WEAll, I think, is an incredible movement of organizations and activists, academics, governments, change makers from all over the world, who are really recognizing that we're lost if we forget that every good comes first and foremost from the earth, and every service is only valuable as so far as it contributes to our well-being. And so the goals we set really matter, because they become the frameworks for evaluating our economy and its success. And if we keep just using economic goals, we'll always be evaluating the economy according to its own capacity to support itself, rather than our broader societal goals. And so ultimately, I think a lot of what we're doing, and why I love this job, working for WEAll so much, is that it's really about asking societies to gain a little more clarity, right, on what we're really trying to achieve, so that we can start designing and evaluating our economies according to its contribution to those social and ecological goals. And for me, also moving from the development space into the wellbeing economy space, it's been an incredible opportunity to really support economic systems change within higher income countries. Because to be honest, we are the problem, yeah? And so this and the level of interest and momentum that is happening with this space is just so inspiring. And so for me, I think it's about remembering that humanity has the capacity to be a positive agent. Yeah, within our ecosystem, within our society, and that the economy can be as well. And so we can do better than just climate change mitigation, right? We can actually produce things in a way that regenerates our natural environment and protects it and supports it. And so ultimately, I guess the major thing I would want to just say in closing is that if any of you are interested in these kind of ideas, I'm assuming you are if you're at this session, I hope you'll join the Wellbeing Economy movement, who's really illustrating that once we realize we are the economy, we realize we can change it. And when we change it, we can change the world.
Thanks, Amanda. Yes. Thank you so much. All right, Jennifer, if you could do the same and just for a few minutes share your journey into this work and tell us a bit more about what you do now, and then we'll get into the conversation amongst the three of us. So please share your story.
Sure. Yes, so my name is Jennifer Hinton, and I should clarify that I'm not a professor because you know the hierarchies of university. Yeah, I think no, but that's okay. So I am a researcher at Lund University, just started there this month. Before I was at Stockholm University in the Stockholm Resilience Center. And so I've been in Sweden for about 6 years now. But how did I get into looking at the economy in the first place? Because my background, I'm originally from the US as well, coincidentally. I'm from Colorado. And I had studied political science and international relations as my undergrad. And so when I had focused on China specifically, because of some professor told me I should focus on China. And so then when I finished that degree, I got the chance to go to China and teach English. And I was placed by an agency in a rural village in China. And I was really excited to see firsthand this miracle of Chinese development that I had been studying, that China had been, the economy had been growing at double-digit rates, so 10%, 12% per year. And so this was lifting people out of poverty, and everything was just coming up roses. Everything was better in China because of this development. So I was really excited to see this in person. But actually, what I experienced in my 6 months in this Chinese village was the exact opposite. And that's really what set me into trying to find sustainable pathways forward. So when I got there, it didn't take me long to notice the amount of pollution around me. Even though we were in the countryside, there were factories all over. And that's, what grows the economy is a lot of industrial output. And those factories were, of course, polluting the air. And there were lots of days where I could look directly at the sun and it was just orange from the amount of smoke. And I would take a shower and the water would run off brown from my skin. And then the factories were also putting their waste in the water. And by the time I got there, the rivers of this area had been so polluted that all the fish were dead. There was foam in the rivers. Maybe you've seen these kinds of pictures or you've witnessed it yourselves. And so this was killing the ecosystems. The farmers had no other source of water to irrigate their crops, so they were using this polluted water. So the ecosystems were being destroyed and the people were getting sick. At the same time, this tight-knit community, a small community, kind of like yours maybe, Amanda, was also getting ripped apart by this narrative of development, this drive for development, because all of the people between the ages of 20 and 40 were going away. They were going to the city to get jobs because that was the purpose. You have to make money. Just staying in your community and growing food isn't good enough. And so families were getting ripped apart by this. I met little children who had never met their parents because their parents had moved to the city and they didn't get vacation time. And so there was all of these social and ecological impacts that really made me think, is this development? Is this progress? Is this really what we want for these people, for the world? Because I realized, from studying that this is the same pattern that is being implemented everywhere in the world. So that's really what started me thinking about these things differently. Then fast forward, I went through a sustainability science program, a master's program at Lund University. So that was my first time really coming to Sweden. And there I did my master's thesis on the circular economy, because I kept bumping into this thing about economic growth and the development, and the circular economy seemed like the perfect solution, because right now we have a linear economy. So we take resources in at one side, we make products and stuff that we buy, and then we throw them out as waste and pollution on the other side, right? So if we can use that waste as inputs for new products and make this a circular economy, it seems like the solution. The problem is the circular economy is often spoken about, and we do have to make the economy circular, but it's often spoken and written about as a way to have sustainable growth, to have green growth and green profit. And so even if we could get the economy to be perfectly circular, which we cannot physically, but even if we could, and we keep trying to grow the circle, we're going to keep using more resources and creating more pollution, right? And we know that we're already in a dangerous situation with climate change. So then I started wondering, okay, does the economy really have to grow? Is this like a natural law of the economy that we have to grow? And I joined this social movement called the post-growth movement, a network of researchers and activists who were thinking about how can we get beyond this growth-based economic model, because the economy doesn't have to just naturally grow. And at one of our meetings, one of the members came to the group and said, I think I have found a key to going beyond the growth-based economy. And he said, okay, so I think it's not-for-profit business. And we sort of just sat there like, what is that? What is a not-for-profit business? We know nonprofits, we know businesses, these are two different animals. And he said, no. I was at this conference and this company was presenting itself. It's called Mayuma, and he's in Australia. So this is an Australian company. It is a civil engineering company, so it builds roads and bridges and large buildings. It makes over $20 million per year. So it's a business, right? But it's not for profit. So all of its financial surplus, or if you're Swedish, överskott, goes back into social benefit. It goes back to helping the indigenous community in Australia that runs and owns it. And he said, what if we can imagine an entire market, an entire economy made up of these not-for-profit businesses, so that all of the surplus and all of the economic activity is for social benefit. So it creates sort of a circularity in the economy that means it doesn't actually have to keep growing to meet people's needs. And that could also solve some of our environmental crises. So I'm going to wrap it up here because I've been taking a lot of time, but the last 10 years or so, I've been working on these ideas, developing this not-for-profit world economic model. I have presented it to lots of mainstream economists and to political scientists, and I have yet to find any critical problems with it. So this is actually, it's given me a lot of hope to work on this model, and it's something that I think is a concrete building block that exists in the economy we have today that can take us to a more sustainable economy in the future.
Thank you, Jennifer. Okay. So that tells you a bit more about who you're listening to amazing young women that are really leading the way in new economic thinking and practice. And we're going to have a discussion now for about 15 minutes, and then you'll have a chance to ask them questions or make your own comments. And at the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, one of the big pieces of work that we've done is the creation of a Wellbeing Economy Policy Design Guide. And we realised in speaking with policymakers around the world that there was this real gap for how to go about creating policies differently towards building a wellbeing economy. And the reason I'm telling you about that now is because the structure of that guide sets out the wellbeing economy process that we think policymakers should go through with their citizens. And the first step of that is articulating a shared vision for what it means to live well together. And that's what Scenario 2030 are doing with communities here in Sweden as well. So to kick off our conversation, we're also going to start with visions. And I'd love if you could both share what your vision is for a just and sustainable wellbeing economy. So project us forward to us having solved these problems and living in a better system. Amanda, can you articulate what that would look like for you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think this is really probably the most important question, right? Because I think often the major barrier for meaningful economic system change is just our own imaginations. And so really thinking about and challenging this idea that any other economic system is going to be a worse one, is a starting point. And so for me, at least at a personal level, I often start with thinking about, okay, well, where are the situations when I feel most at peace, when I feel most cared for, and when I feel most aligned with my life's purpose? And so for me, I feel most at peace in nature and really cared for when other people are really like giving graciously, and most aligned when I'm able to create and provide for others as well. And to me, those are really the kind of foundations of a well-being economy, and a sense that it can be more of what really matters, not just less of what doesn't. And so at the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, we have a global membership of thousands of individuals and organizations, et cetera. And we went through a process of really trying to create this shared vision. And we developed what we call the 5 WEAll needs. And it's this idea of these are 5 things that we all need the economy to deliver for us. And the first one is dignity, and so how do we begin to evaluate our economy by its capacity to provide everyone with what is needed to live a life of dignity and purpose? And then nature is a core need, and so how do we begin to design and evaluate our economies by its capacity to protect, restore, and really cherish our natural environment and all of the species that we cohabitate this planet with. And then the third one is about purpose. And this is really about changing our understanding of value. And so how do we move from having our economy associate value with just how much profit or wealth is generated by really evaluating our economic activities and behaviors by their contribution to social and ecological well-being, right? And so this is about really moving and starting to envision a system where our work as caregivers, as artists, as stewards of the earth are appropriately valued for the happiness and well-being it brings to ourselves and others. And then the fourth principle is all about fairness, and so really having justice sit at the heart of our economic system so that we can break out of this cycle of trying to grow the economy, so we take some of the wealth to redistribute it and fix the damages done in the process, and really intentionally designing an economy that ensures a fair distribution of time, power, wealth, and income. And last but not least, definitely, is the principle of participation. So we really need to ensure that we have an economy that is actively molded and directed by us, where we have a voice over its shape and form, because participation is important not only for better outcomes, but the act of participating itself is really critical for our well-being as individuals too.
Thank you. And Jennifer, you've already touched on some of this in your introduction, but can you say more about your vision for a wellbeing economy, a just and sustainable economic system? I'm guessing it would have a lot of not-for-profit businesses in it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll build a little bit on what Amanda just said, because I love those needs. I love the way that you framed it, and going back to the purpose of the economy and the purpose of our economic institutions is critical, because any sort of social organization, people come together to accomplish something in particular. So a business or an economic agency, whatever it is, we come together to accomplish something. And in order to really understand what we need to have a sustainable and just economy, we also have to really understand clearly why we don't have that now. What's wrong with the current economy? And part of it is the purpose, is that there is this core purpose and goal built into our economic institutions, in particular into the for-profit legal framework of businesses, is the main purpose or goal is to make investors wealthy. And so, you know, our economy is designed to do that, and it's actually doing that very well. It's achieving this goal very well. A handful of investors have gotten very, very rich from this, right? There are 10 men who own as much wealth as the poorest 85 countries in the world. So 10 men own as much wealth as billions of people. So it's accomplished that. What it's not accomplished is actually meeting everyone's needs within the environmental limits. So we need to repurpose our economic institutions. And luckily, we already have economic institutions that do that. So not-for-profit businesses, like I mentioned, are fit for the purpose of sustainability. They all have a core social benefit mission, and all of their resources have to be used for that. And they can operate as businesses. So they can sell us products and services and create things that we need. So for me, a sustainable economy is one that helps us meet our needs by producing the services and goods that we need for our material well-being and such, but also really leaves the space for us to meet our needs outside of the economy and outside of the market by reconnecting with ourselves, connecting with nature, connecting with each other. And so in a really sustainable and just economy, there would be lots of sharing. There would be lots of growing and making stuff locally without even needing to exchange money. You know, I can imagine a lot of the houses around here, the bostadsföreningen, like the housing cooperatives and whatnot, would be places where you can grow your own food, produce your own energy, these sorts of things, without even needing to exchange money. And then the monetary economy is something that complements and supplements that. And so in order to have this sort of really nice, lush sharing and caring economy that we need, that fits within the environmental limits of the planet, it has to be not-for-profit. And that's my main thing, is like, it's not a singular vision, it's a principle that allows for a diversity of local economies to flourish. And the for-profit way of organizing the economy now does not allow for that. So that's one of the main points that I really want. If you take anything home from this today, from my side, that's what I want you to take home.
Yeah, thank you. And one of the things I love so much about being part of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance is just every day finding new projects and organisations who are bringing this work to life. And that was one of the reasons that WEAll was set up in the first place, was because we're not starting from scratch. This is a movement that exists all over the world, but it's under-resourced and was disconnected, and there's a lot happening, including WEAll's work, to make it more connected and to continue to collaborate. But in order to give everybody a bit of hope, could you both share a couple of examples or opportunities that you're most excited about in terms of bringing that vision to life that you just articulated?
Yeah, I mean, one thing Jennifer and I were talking about actually was, you know, I think a lot of us thought that after the global financial crisis, there was going to be this immediate paradigm shift in terms of recognizing that everything we thought about economics and economic management was wrong. But it took a little while. There was something that I think needed to like percolate and settle in. And then it's just been this incredible renaissance, yeah, in terms of public opinion, and also really a demand and an interest in new economic ideas and initiatives. And we really see this in terms of public opinion. So there are recent surveys that show that over half of people globally believe that our current economic system is doing more harm than good. Yeah, and that it's actively eroding democracy and undermining their trust in collective institutions like governments. And really, as a constructive next step, just last year there was a survey that showed that 74% of people in the G20 countries, the supposed winners of this system, really want their national economic priorities to move beyond a focus on profit and wealth to a focus on ecological sustainability and human well-being. And that's huge, yeah? Like that's clarity on really what we want the economy to be serving. And then within WEAll, I mean, it's not just the public opinion, but we're also seeing the political will with initiatives like the Wellbeing Economy Governments, which is currently comprised of Scotland, Iceland, Finland, New Zealand, and Wales, and Canada just joined. And so this is, governments coming together with a commitment to really redefine their understanding of progress and to share best practice and support one another to figure out how do you really transform your economic system in line with that. And so seeing those kind of initiatives from bottom up and top down and all over the place gives me a lot of hope that we are in a moment of pretty profound transformation in economic thinking.
Thank you. Jen, more hope, please. What have you got?
No, just building on what Amanda said, I've also been in this game for a while, and I've seen in the last 10, 15 years a real surge of energy in this direction. So like Amanda mentioned, there's policy making sort of shifting in this away from prioritizing growth and profit over people and planet, and now it's sort of become more like people, planet, profit, but I increasingly see a shift to people and planet over profit. And that narrative is shifting really rapidly, and that gives me a lot of hope. And that's playing out in all sorts of ways. So in some policies, in new legal forms for business. So like I mentioned, not-for-profit business, we're seeing new legal structures pop up all the time. And I think there's even a very lively discussion happening in Sweden right now about new legal forms for business that prioritize social and environmental concerns. In terms of, economics students and business students have started this movement called Rethinking Economics. And so they are really pushing for changing their own curriculum because they recognize that the economics and business curriculum of today is not up to the task and the challenges of the 21st century. Consumers are shifting, there's like this whole push for thinking more about how our consumption patterns affect other people on the planet. Entrepreneurs, it's sort of happening in all of these different spheres of society. So it's very exciting. And then just in terms of, again, not-for-profit business, totally unpredictable. But I'm seeing a real surge in not-for-profit businesses. So both businesses being started up as not-for-profits, but also nonprofits increasingly going into business, which gives them more independence and financial self-sufficiency to fulfill their social mission the way that they want to. And that also helps build up an alternative economy within the current for-profit economy. So there's a lot of exciting stuff happening. And if you guys want to know of some examples of not-for-profit businesses in Sweden, you can ask me. I'm happy. I have got a sort of a list. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. And I'll be cheeky and add in a couple of examples of my own. One that I get really excited about from one of our Wellbeing Economy governments is that in Wales there's the Future Generations Act and the Future Generations Commissioner. So that's a piece of legislation that enshrines the rights of future generations in every policy decision. So the budgets, every piece of policy and every law get scrutinised in terms of the impact on generations that aren't even born yet. And that's having really profound impacts on how policy gets made, just the way that they have conversations in Wales, because it's genuinely part of every conversation. So I'm quite excited by that as a legislative example of what's possible. And something else that gave me hope recently was the election result in Australia, which felt like amongst other things, it felt like a rejection of the current economic system, and it felt like a rejection of politics which ignores the planet and ignores the well-being of people, and especially the surge in green support and support for independents who were talking about the need to prioritise climate action. So reading those election results with some disbelief a couple of weeks ago gave me hope as well.
Can I add one more thing? Because there's just one more thing that needs to be part of this discussion of hope, is I think the social movements, which is partly represented here at the People's Forum today, but this huge upsurge in the climate movement and movements for social justice, Black Lives Matter and the Sunrise Movement, and all of these movements, women's rights movements, are all increasingly getting interconnected. The way that Wellbeing Economy Alliance has created an alliance of social movements and initiatives, I think that these new alliances that are happening more often give me a lot of hope, because we need social movements to push policy and to push businesses in the right direction.
Absolutely. And actually, once we've finished this discussion and we have conversations amongst all of us, that's exactly what we're going to be talking about, is how you as activists, as change makers with whatever movement you're aligned with, how you feel you could use these ideas and a new economic thinking lens in your work. So we'll come back to exactly that. And I don't want to get too pessimistic, but I do want to ask you both, having talked about what makes you feel hopeful, before we go to questions from everyone else, do you want to say something about the barriers in this work and what you feel, why isn't this happening? It seems so obvious that this is what we need. So why aren't we there yet?
Yeah. I mean, I think there are a lot of barriers, and I've touched on some of them. And the major one I do think is a lot of our limitations in terms of imagination, and also the economy feeling quite intimidating as a space for us to engage and discuss and be proactive in. So I think there's that sort of groundwork of us all demystifying that space together and starting to have more of these discussions and feeling like we are entitled to have an opinion and a right and a responsibility to really impact the system. But then a little more concretely, I guess I would probably say multinational corporations. Yeah, I think we've allowed over the last decades for multinationals to really come to govern our global economic system. And working with policymakers in particular, you realize how much of a race to the bottom there is in terms of social and environmental standards in order to try to attract or appease these giants. And so I feel quite like there's very urgent need for global competition legislation to break them up. Almost every sector, I think now, like every sector in the world is dominated by less than a handful of corporations, right? And that's economically really problematic and ethically unacceptable, right, in terms of that power consolidation. And so for me, I've always said that if we ever get a binding code of conduct for multinationals that require them to abide by much higher standards than any other sort of business, that I would retire and open a bar in my town in Vermont. So if you all can all make this happen, the first round's on me. Yeah, you can come drink for free. Yeah.
Jen, what do you think? I'm pretty sure you would agree with that point about multinationals, but anything else to add about barriers that you see in your work?
Yeah, I mean, again, building a little bit on what Amanda just said is so definitely the vested interest. But I think there's also something about, and being locked out of economics, right? Leave economics to the experts. And mainstream economists are also very good at pushing other people out. Like, you can't talk about the economy, I'm the expert, So I think there is a lot of work to be done in demystifying the economy and empowering us all to be economists in a way. We are the economy, so we need to have the power and ability to speak about it and to confront the mainstream narratives about it. But I think there's also there is a lot of buy-in and belief still in the for-profit mythology that this system will work if we just give it enough time, if we can just allow the investors to seek profit, then at some point, they create jobs, they create businesses, and then they create the products and services we need. So it's actually the best system for all of us. So that's one myth that really needs to be busted, and that there's sub-myths of that the profit motive is the only way we can get innovation, for instance. But that's so easy to bust that myth, because if you think about the most important innovations in human history, the first bridges and wheels and bicycles, the first vaccines, none of these were innovated for profit. All of these were innovated out of social need and challenges, right? So they were just trying to solve problems. That's where innovation happens. And it usually happens not for profit. And then the final part of the narrative, I think that's really we need to overcome, is that there's only two ways to organize the economy. And I call this Cold War trauma, because it really came from the Cold War, that, it's capitalism versus Soviet communism, Mao and Stalin versus American kind of Western capitalism. And so if you don't buy into capitalism, the only alternative is Stalin and Mao communism. And if you've ever questioned capitalism, you might have been called a communist. I have. And so we really need to dispel that too. And that's part of what working on on this model of the not-for-profit economy has done for me is it's not a capitalist economy, and it's also not a state-planned communism. It is an actual different way, and it's not the only one. There's a lot of different ways to organize the economy, so we really need to challenge that narrative that if you question capitalism or the for-profit economy, you're just a communist. Yeah.
Yes, thank you both very much for also managing to keep the barriers quite inspiring as well, so thanks for that. So over to you now, if anyone wants to ask questions or has comments, things that have bubbled up in your mind listening to Amanda and Jennifer. Yes.
Yes, I'm really thrilled about what you're talking about. It's very exciting, I think. I just want to focus on one problem. You said, do people say you're a communist?
Sometimes.
Yes. Yes. And I mean, I am also a communist because I'm also against capitalism. But I'm not a communist. So, I mean, I find this is a problem. How can you prove that you don't end up in a sort of communist planning, what do you call it in English? A plan.
State-planned economy.
Planned economy. I think that's crucial to have to step forward. That you don't end up in old discussions. That's actually 20th century discussions. Thank you very much. I really. Exciting.
Thank you. Do either of you want to respond to that? Jen, do you want to
Yeah,
continue this conversation about not being a communist?
I'll quickly just say, I mean, that's actually been, because I was trapped in this Cold War trauma of there's only two ways to, before I started working on these ideas. And then working on these ideas has freed me so much, because then when somebody says, oh, you don't like capitalism, you're a communist, I could say, nope, I want a not-for-profit market economy. And then people are like, they don't know what to do with it. So it opens up a whole new space to have these discussions that we need to be having, where, it's a creative space where then people can sort of challenge, what do you mean a market? That's capitalism. No, but the ownership is different. So then you can start to really dig into what is the purpose of the economy and who should it benefit and how. And you can get straight into those questions when you start talking about a not-for-profit market economy, for example.
Yeah, and I find that if you can push the conversation to a different place, a different starting point, I've personally got stuck in some of these conversations with people I know who are more conservative with a small c in their thinking. But when you ask the question about what sort of society do you want to live in, like describe the society that you think is a good society, then we find that actually we may think that we disagree with each other, but there's more that we have in common than not anywhere on the political spectrum when we start to describe what a good life is and what really matters for people. So if you feel like you're getting stuck in the dichotomies of the old politics, I would recommend taking a step back and asking that question about, let's just stop this for a second, describe what you think a good life looks like, what a good society looks like, and then look for the things that we have in common to try and bust through those dichotomies that I think can be really harmful. Yes.
I think there is a lack of good examples that you can point to, like your little town, for instance. Maybe none of us have ever experienced that, but you have that in mind, so you can sort of have an example of something different, at least. I don't know if everything was good there, but...
No, it is. I mean, and honestly, I think that this is a lot about what Lisa was saying as well. How do we move beyond just critique of the current system to really positively envisioning an alternative? And I think this is the moment where we're at, and the real urgent need is more of that positive visioning. Because actually, I mean, my town, there's parts of it that, you know what I mean, I have a nice process, but I think we would all be able to identify aspects of our current economic system that we really appreciate. Yeah, the ways in which we produce and provide things for one another, and examples of ways that we feel cared for by others, yeah, and that we've built this incredible system of cooperation and reciprocal exchange between one another. And so I think it's just about identifying those positive aspects and thinking about how we can build a system that has more of those, as opposed to starting with the negatives of these are the problems with our current system. And so I said earlier, I think particularly when it comes to the environment, we are so used to thinking about how we have a negative impact on the environment that it's almost hard for us to imagine the ways that we can be positive species and a part of this ecosystem. And when we change that lens and we really try to find those examples of where we are actively regenerating and growing and supporting a flourishing ecosystem, then we find those examples, right, of the kind of areas of work and of energy and of creativity where, you know, we want to put more incentives and encourage and reward that. And so this is where we do a lot of stuff at WEAll around narratives for this particular reason, because we do find when you start with problems, you already close people down a lot and they already have some preconceived ideologies about what those problems and the origins of it. Whereas when you start with vision and a positive goal, you can, and then think about the root causes in the systems that are going to be able to like support that, you are able to get a lot more people on board. And that's what we need at this moment. We need a movement of millions of hearts and minds and hands to really come together to push for this sort of transformation.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes, thank you very much. I think it's really interesting. I have two things that I don't know who can answer, but one thing is that we in the climate movement in Sweden or in other parts, perhaps in the Western world, are mostly white middle class people, and I just thought, is this a way to reach the more poorer people also to come with this economic, because perhaps when you are on the poorer part of the the more poor people in Sweden, they want to be like middle class, and that is what they are striving for. So it's difficult that we go together in the climate movement. But I just think that perhaps this is a good way to meet. And I also have a question about now the companies are paying taxes of their profits, aren't they? So how shall we do then? How will the state get taxes if we have non-profit? So that's the question.
Jen, do you want to take that second point about taxation in a not-for-profit model, and then maybe Amanda, you could speak about that, the first part about privilege maybe and bringing different groups into this movement.
Mm-hmm. Can I answer both of them? Sure. I mean, just a very quick thought on the first one is that one of the strengths of identifying for-profit as a really destructive organizing principle is that you can bring social and environmental movements together very easily, because the driver of both inequality and environmental destruction is the pursuit of private financial gain. And when we identify that core driver of both of those problems, then we can bring people together much more easily rather than seeing like workers fighting the environmental movement and such. So that's one just little insight that I've had. So then with the taxation in an entirely not-for-profit economy, it's funny because we often, I think, overestimate how much corporate taxation contributes to government income. So here in Sweden, the last time I checked, which was admittedly a few years ago, the corporate tax only contributes like 6 or 7% of the state income. So it's not that much. And if you think about it, that's supposed to compensate for all of the problems that for-profit corporations are making in society, and it doesn't at all. So if we can just stop making those problems in the first place, then we don't need that tax at all anymore.
Easy. Amanda, do you have a response to either of those questions?
Yeah, I mean, I think she did a really great job speaking about it. I mean, one thing, it does come up quite a bit because the Wellbeing Economy movement, in terms of the term Wellbeing Economy, is largely being driven by higher income countries at the moment, right? So movements and governments that are, and so I get this question quite a bit around for low-income countries, don't you still want them to grow, right? Like, isn't this still? And so there's a part to your question that's about this, but I think there's, you know, also a cultural dimension, which, you know, I'll speak to as well. And I think they're interconnected in the sense that once we develop a different metric of progress, and success as a society, then you also have a different metric for, let's say, my country, the United States, is the richest country in the world, and we're miserable. Like, we're very unhappy as a society, and, you know, we're consuming the planet, and, you know, we have all of these various sort of issues. And so if you can, this is the way you can identify these alternative blueprints and also celebrate and acknowledge the incredible systems that exist within these supposedly poor communities that are embedded in different kinds of ways of providing for one another, connecting, sharing, caring for one another, and to really acknowledge and celebrate them for what they actually contribute, right? And the wisdom that's often within those alternative systems. And so it is a challenge because our current narrative is, it's not just our metrics and our economic models, it's cultural. We have an idea, greed is good, more wealth is always better, and that as a transformative journey is going to take time, I think, for us as well. But I think, you know, deep inside, we have a sense of what really matters, and we can see that certain countries are succeeding economically and not so much in terms of well-being.
Yeah, and on your first question, I do quite a lot of work in Scotland with our Wellbeing Economy Alliance Scotland hub, and we've been doing workshops with communities in deprived areas on what a wellbeing economy could mean and working through this wellbeing economy vision process. And one of the very first ones that we did, a woman came up to me at the end and said, you know, people have been coming here for years and consulting us, asking us questions about what's wrong and about poverty in the area. You're the first people that have ever came here and asked what we like and what we love about our community. And that asset-based approach is actually also important to your question. If you may not have been to Amanda's town and you may not know of an entire place that is a wellbeing economy, but every place has aspects, has elements, has these behaviours of us producing and providing for one another every day in ways that we should be and that are a wellbeing economy, but we maybe just don't identify them as economic activities because of the way we've come to view the economy. So definitely still more for us to do as a movement to make sure that we're being really inclusive of the people who are most negatively impacted by the current system. But when we have been able to reach and work with and co-create things with those people who are really impacted by the current system, they have so many great ideas and so many systems and examples to contribute and so many answers to contribute. So I think you're right that it can be a lens and a way into a more inclusive approach to change. So thank you all very much for the questions. This is the first half of the session over with, and some of you may have only been expecting to join us for 45 minutes, so if you do need to leave, feel free to leave, but we hope that you'll stay with us, because for the second part we're going to be having conversations to dive into this question about movements. And you're all here at the People's Forum because you are change makers. You want to be part of building a better world. So we're going to split into smaller conversations. Amanda.